So why would an instructor use an oral assessment? Big reason why people are interested in oral assessments is because you can get a live, or in other words, synchronous interaction with a student, which provides direct evidence of their abilities. When you're teaching remotely, an oral assessment can get you closer to a timed supervised exam that you may be comfortable with. Another reason why you'd use it is because you can use it to sort of confirm the student's abilities with prior work. So for example, if you have a number of assessments that come in throughout the term, and those ones weren't oral assessments, you can actually ask the student about those assessments they've done throughout the term to confirm that the level of work that they did there matches up with that individual student. And then another good reason to use oral assessments is if you're preparing students for future oral assessments. So it's preparing them for what they need to do in future courses or future careers. So what do oral assessments do well? Well, they work really well for higher order thinking. They work well for synthesis of ideas, for depth of knowledge. They're not as great for breadth of knowledge, right? Because in an oral assessment, you're going to have a short amount of time. So you're really only going to be able to ask about, 1, 2, or 3 topics, for example, as opposed to all of the topics within your course. It also assesses students' ability to think on their feet. So if that's something that's important in your discipline, it does a good job of that. It also assesses interpersonal competence and professionalism, which again, depending on the discipline, may be more or less important. And it works really well as one item in a collection of assessment evidence. So I wouldn't suggest using an oral assessment as your only means of assessment, but it's one piece of evidence alongside other pieces of evidence that you have. So what should oral assessments not be used for? I'd say they shouldn't be used as the only strategy to prevent academic dishonesty, right? So if that's why you're using oral assessment, then you may want to be considering other things as well. It's not just your, say, silver bullet to prevent academic dishonesty. It shouldn't be as the only direct replacement for an entire written or high-stakes assessment. So if you typically have a 3-hour final exam, you shouldn't look at replacing that entire exam with a 5 or 10-minute oral assessment. Instead, you may be replacing a portion of that with a 5 or 10-minute oral assessment plus some other assessments. And it shouldn't be used in courses where it just simply doesn't match the learning outcomes. So what are some of the approaches that people use for oral assessments? So there's generally 3 main approaches, but obviously there could be mixes and tweaks on these. But there is one approach called the Q&A list. So essentially, you provide students with a list of questions in advance, so they get to prepare, so it's not so much about thinking on their feet. Another approach is the discussion reflection. So in this one, essentially students are explaining or justifying their prior work. So this would work really well in a type of course where there's a portfolio or a variety of assessment items that have been submitted throughout the term, right? So it allows you to ask questions about it. It allows students to reflect on it, explain what they learned from that. It works really well to get a good broad sense of what the student has learned. And then the third approach is more of just an open conversation. So either the instructor or the student picks a topic or concept to discuss and talk about it with the student, probe the student, ask questions. This one's going to be more difficult to assess, so you're going to want to make sure you have a really strong rubric or checklist to use so that you are assessing each student in a similar way.